Hey guys, you are listening to the Unruly Doctor podcast, a podcast about life, metaphysics, current events, politics, and anything I find interesting. Please subscribe to our channel and like this episode so that we can grow and reach a bigger audience. Enjoy the episode. All right, guys, I'm back. Episode 14, the Unruly Doctor podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Bain. I did, in fact, actually end up missing an episode just after the last time I recorded, saying I hadn't missed it more than one episode, as I was uploading one time a week. So I'm actually considering this now my second recording for the day. Why? Because I was already probably about 15 minutes into a recording, and I realized I didn't hit the button to record the sound. So everything I've been basically talking to myself about was, I guess, a great dry run, because now I'm going to say this exact same thing I just said for the last 15 minutes. I'm going to say it again. So let's start with current events, because and it's just so funny I was talking about this. But yeah, so in current events, if you haven't been following, right, last a couple episodes ago, I was talking about the trucker convoy. So if you haven't been keeping updated on that, as an update for the trucker convoy, these guys recently, the leader of Canada, Justin Trudeau, decided to enact emergency powers. So that should sound familiar to a lot of us who've been out of a rock the last 2 years, right? This whole emergency powers thing. Enacted emergency powers that are typically reserved for wartime or terrorists. So, go figure. This guy's labeling these, working class citizens as terrorists just because they're protesting and blocking roadways with their cars. I mean, give me a break. So, he enacts them, right? Says we're going to arrest you if you're in any of these areas. There's videos of people who are just trying to go to businesses who are being arrested because they're just in the area, right? So exercising their right to be able to walk through public. So he starts arresting people, and the truckers pull out now. So unfortunately, they pulled out, I think, far too early. I wish they had stuck around longer, because I think they probably would have got what they wanted. But the trucker convoy is allegedly going to be coming to the United States, so that I am curious to see what will happen, because I think our government is not that far behind Canada's government. So I am very curious to kind of see where this kind of ends up. But it really should start to highlight some scary things, because one of the things that happened during this whole period was Canada started to actually shut down and freeze the bank accounts of truckers and people who donated to campaigns. In fact, they actually froze an account on a crowdfunding website that had a value of about $3.1 million. And they actually froze that account and a lot of accounts of who donated to that site. So, this is a pretty scary time here, because the governments, not just Canada, but around the globe, have been doing quite a large power grab in the last 2 years. And if there's anything that we know, and you've listened to my previous episodes, when governments come in and grab power, it is almost impossible to make them give it back. Right? So, this is kind of the history of how government works. They get a little bit and a little more and a little more, and they push it too far. People finally do some pushback. But then the government keeps, a good chunk of that power source, and then they push it a little further, and then they take another chunk. And so, bit by bit, you get a government that started off small, and then it becomes a bloated monstrosity, which is kind of where we're at in history now, right? Where, there's been periods where the government was this large, and then people just took it down completely. And then it rebuilt itself. And then there was probably a good period there where government knew its place to work for the people. But then once again, now here it is again with a bloated monster. And the scary thing is, now this bloated monster has access to technology and ways to basically cut off your food supply, cut off your money, things that it hasn't been able to do in the past, right? So like in the past, when the government overstepped their boundaries, the people had a lot of power, because, unless you go and rob every single person door to door of all of their valuables, you can't cut off their food supply and water supply and money, because they could hide it and move it around, or, whatever, because everything was physical. Now that everything's moved to a digital asset, now the government can come in and pretty easily take your money, freeze your bank accounts, delete things if they really wanted to. And that's what's really coming, because it really folds into this idea, if you've ever heard of this, called the social credit system. The social credit system's already enacted, by the way, if you've never heard of this before. Now, I would suspect that most of you probably have, but the social credit system's already been enacted in China for several years now. And essentially, it's a system of where, for example, if somebody doesn't like your politics, or I'm taking an Uber and this guy can downgrade my social score and I rate him. I bump into someone at the grocery store and they don't like, that I bumped them, so they can downgrade me there. Or, for example, my neighbor, if my neighbor's too noisy, I could bump them down, or if I just don't like them, I could do so. And once your social credit score gets low enough, then what actually happens is the government can do many things. They'll freeze your bank account, or they can downgrade you from being able to purchase plane tickets or train tickets or go to work or whatever, until you do things they want you to do, which will re-upgrade your status, and then they can give you back your normal basic human rights. And this has already been going on in China now for at least, a good amount of years. The first time I heard about this social credit system in China was probably, I would imagine, about 2-3 years ago, maybe a little longer, when I first heard of it. And there was a famous episode of a TV show called Black Mirror that basically took that idea and created a whole episode about what the future is going to look like for most of us, based upon this social credit system. Because as technology is getting more and more powerful, and facial recognition technology and security technology, and our ability to store large sums of data in small packages and all of these things, and the widespread use of fast speed internet and things, it's going to be very easy to track people 24/7 anywhere they are, even inside their own homes, with very little difficulty, and being able to create a government-run social system where you can downgrade or upgrade someone's social status by petty, grievances, or the government downgrading you secretly behind the scenes, which, as I'm sure, has already gone on, right? Because they're already doing that with things, on social media, right? You can get what's called shadow banned on social media for having a differing opinion than what they want people to listen to. And so they'll downgrade your videos. You'll get less likes, less views. People who already follow you won't even see it, even though they follow you. So they're already starting to do this, or it's just not like widespread and announced. So that's what's been going on in China. And so this incident in Canada is already starting to highlight that it's starting to work its way over into other places that have been labeled as being democracies, when it's obvious that these places that we've said are democracies probably really aren't. They're starting to turn into fascists little by little, and that includes us too, because that's the big. Remember, an episode or two ago, I was talking about the stakeholder capitalism problem that's coming, and that's a legitimate, big time problem that we will have to deal with in our lifetime, because unfortunately, a large portion of our population is very easy to convince of literally anything, as long as it's on television or, on a radio station, or whatever. Like, people buy stuff so quickly these days without ever trying to actually look into it. That it's not going to be shocking to me when we convert basically into fascism, as long as it's labeled as, stakeholder capitalism, as long as it's labeled as, a sociable, equitable situation. As long as it does that, people will buy into it without ever having even looked to what's involved. And it's really unfortunate, because it will be the demise of freedom in society, right? The one thing that really shocks me is that, there's this new thing now where, if you even say the word freedom, that you must be some far right, radical, crazy person. For the vast majority of history, people in all walks of politics have all agreed on one thing: they would like freedom. if there's ever been a time where society has definitely gotten together and backed each other on, it has totally been always about freedom. Look at every revolution that's ever existed. Uh, like literally every revolution. I mean, come on. Like, even the slavery revolution, right? As slaves, freeing themselves and then fighting or whatever. What was that about? It was about freedom. I mean, come on, guys. I mean, 1776, the founding of the United States. What was that about? It was about freedom from tyranny, from Britain. Duh. I mean, this is crazy that this is not like an obvious thing, that freedom is what actually binds us all together. It's the universal opinion that we all want. It's one of the few things that all humans can agree on that they all desire, which is freedom, right? If I ask somebody on the street, hey, if you had all the money in the world and the freedom to do whatever you want, what would you do? Oh my God, that would be great. I wish, right? Everybody says that. I'm not going to go up to somebody on the street and say, if you had the freedom to do whatever you want, what would it be? Oh, I don't want freedom. Yeah, no one says that. Everybody says I want full freedom to do whatever I want. You ask them, hey, what's your job? Oh, I hate my job. Okay, why do you hate your job? Well, because it doesn't give me the freedom to do what I want to do. Well, what do you want to do? Wow, I wish I was a chef. I should have always been a chef. Well, quit your job tomorrow and you could go be a chef tomorrow. Yeah, that's what freedom allows you to do. Right now I've been looking at my life and, as my rent is going up, I don't want to pay big rents anymore. I'm done. So I recently decided that before my lease is up in the next 5 months, I'm going to basically sell all of my big possessions that I couldn't squeeze into a small space. And I'm going to go buy a travel trailer. I'm going to deck it out, and I'm going to go live in a trailer for a while, maybe a couple of years, because you can just buy those things for 15 grand and then put maybe I'll sink 3, 4, 5 grand into it, fix it up, and then park it on an RV resort. And my rent would be technically like $700 a month. That's cool with me. I'd rather live below my means. I don't need like a bunch of stuff. And I think a lot of us recently have been reevaluating our lives and realizing like we just don't need all this stuff. At least I don't. I don't need a big house. I don't need, I've got a million TVs for different reasons, and I don't really need all of them, right? Because there's a TV in every room. I just need one. I don't need like 1,000. I don't need to live like a caveman, okay? We are in 2022, and a lot of what I do is technologically, needed, right? Like making this podcast, I need technology for that. But I could easily shoot this podcast in a travel trailer. Right now I shoot it in my home office / studio, but I could easily set up, especially if I'm customizing a trailer, a travel trailer, I could easily deck it out so that I could record it in my trailer. A lot of podcasts record in RVs now. So, I could easily record this podcast in an RV, and maybe I could mount my cameras or something really cool. I don't know, whatever. So that's my life right now. So actually, if you have a piece of land, if you're watching this for some reason, you have a piece of land that you'd be willing to let me drop a travel trailer on while I build this thing out. Or maybe if you have a water and sewage hookup, maybe electricity, maybe we'll talk. I'll rent it from you. So that's what I'm doing. But and I think the other reason I'm going into that too is because I don't like the government overreach. I don't like it. It's getting real scary, and I like to think of myself as someone who thinks 2 steps ahead of most people many times. Just something I was gifted with. And I definitely foresee the future and where it's going, and I don't like that. So I would like my living situation to be mobile so that at any given moment I could strap up that sucker and I could go if I had to. I could leave, I could go to another state, I could move, whatever, in an instant. Versus, if you have a big brick and mortar house, it's pretty much impossible for you to just up and leave because you have so much stuff. You have all this stuff in your house, and you have to sell your house. You have to do all this crazy stuff. Versus, I buy a travel trailer for 15 grand and sink 2-3 grand and make it nicer, or at least my style to fit my lifestyle. I'm paid off. It's like I got a paid off mortgage. I don't have to worry about anything. That might, I could take that, pick it up, move it to a different state, pay a guy on a farm. Hey, can I just hook up to your water, sewage, and electricity? Sure. I could probably pay him $400 a month and just, have all this land and beautiful views and no leases, no landlord type situation really, just a handshake agreement to park on someone's place, or I could go to an RV resort somewhere else if I really want to. But you can even do that for weeks. I could do that for months. I could, there's no big leases for that. And I think there's actually going to be a large movement of people in my generation and just the ones above it and a little bit below it that are going to probably do the same thing. I think that's why the tiny house movement has really like blown up, right? This tiny house movement thing. But I didn't really realize that the RV thing was as big as it was. People buying old RVs and fixing them up for cheap and making them look really nice on the inside. I had no idea that was even a thing. So I'm really glad that that was brought up to me by somebody recently, because I'm totally going to do that. I mean, I was like, because I was looking at getting a tiny house and I couldn't believe how expensive they had gotten. They were like, oodles of cash. Some of them are $100,000 or $140,000 for a new one of these things. And I couldn't believe that. I was like, no way, Jose. You're right. Not for me. I'm not going to spend that I'm not going to take a loan out just so I could buy a tiny house. Kind of defeats the purpose, right? But, you're telling me 15 grand, I'm in, 15 grand plus like 2-3, I'm in, no problem. I don't care if I spend 5-6 weekends fixing that puppy up before it's ready. That's a great idea. So that's totally what I'm going to do. I'm very excited about it. I'm excited to show you guys that in future content here. When I purchase this thing and I figure out where I could park it, so while I fix it up, I'll show you me fixing it up, and it's going to be really cool. I'm excited about that. As a piece of other news, right? One of the other, I think, categories of organizations, I should say, maybe professions, organizations. I'm trying to figure out the word I'm looking for. But one of the things that recently just got put onto a website called the Daily Mail. It's fairly popular. I wouldn't call it a news station. I'd really call it government probably backed, run, fake news station. There's plenty of those there that are backed by the big billionaires of the world. I'm pretty sure this is probably one of them. I don't consider this a news station. But there's a recent article that I just read that I really should concern all of us, because if there's anything we learned in the last 2 years, one, the government takes a lot of power, and that's what they want. They're very power hungry. We've known that for thousands of years, but it's only gotten worse. But worse than that, the scientific community seems to think that they just can create and do whatever they like and totally ignore your human rights, and it's fine. Don't worry about it. This is for everybody. So here's an article on the Daily Mail, and I'll pop up a picture of it here now. The article is titled, "The Vaccine That Spreads Immunity by Passing Itself On Like a Virus." Oh boy, this is scary. Researchers investigate potential for self-spreading, needleless inoculations in the wake of COVID pandemic, essentially meaning exactly what it says, that they're going to inoculate small bouts of people and then throw them out into society to spread vaccines like a virus as they're walking through populations. This is freaky, guys. I'm reading this and I can't even believe this is real. This is really freaky. I'm looking at it right here on my computer right now. It says around a dozen research institutions in the U.S., Europe, and Australia are already investigating the potential for self-spreading vaccines in the wake of the coronavirus pandemic. What are these people thinking? This is beyond bizarre that you think that this is a good idea. It says it still has to be contagious enough to infect large populations rapidly, but weakened so that it does not result in anything like the same level of illness as the full-strength virus. Does anybody foresee a terrible situation that is likely to happen here? Is it just me? Or does it sound like they already know of the potential for accidentally releasing this thing strong as the original or stronger on accident and then killing millions of people? Maybe I'm crazy, but it wouldn't be the first time. We've had other technology like this in the past, where we were, messing with, in early vaccine creation. right? Everybody's kind of heard of the two different types of vaccines, right? The oral, for example, the polio vaccine, right? The oral polio vaccine versus the live versus the dead one. It's in your regular history books, right? There's a reason they stopped using the live one. Why did they stop using the live one? Because it gave everybody polio and killed a bunch of people. So it killed and crippled a bunch of people. That's why they stopped using the live polio vaccine, and they went with the dead version, quote unquote, the dead one, because of how deadly the first one was. And it spread to people rapidly through poop and pee. To other kids and other people, which was the other scary part. So now you're actually going to design something like that, but actually spreadable in its entire design, where you don't have to, you're literally going to do the exact same thing, but worse with new technology. Where's my thing? Gotcha, bitch. Yeah, hold on, Chappelle. Gotcha, bitch. Yeah, I agree. This is crazy. I mean, not only is this a violation of all of our human rights, because I don't want that in my body, period. I don't care what the hell that thing is. I don't want that in my body. But you're telling me that regardless of my rights, right? I guess HIPAA's out the window. I mean, just throw that in the garbage. The Nuremberg Code, just throw that in the garbage. I mean, does anybody ever question why we made the Nuremberg Code in the first place? It's for stuff like this. This is exactly why they wrote this. I mean, this is like a perfect example of why we made the Nuremberg Code, so that stuff like this would not even be thought of. And if it was thought of, that it would never be utilized. Yet here we are talking about how we're researching it in multiple countries already, probably have for years secretly, and no one heard about it until recently. And then phony baloney news stations like the Daily Mail start pushing it out little by little, not to everybody, but little bits, so that you can see it, so you can be prepped for the future. And unfortunately, a section of our population is going to read this and think, this is a great idea. Has anybody ever seen the movie I Am Legend? Have anybody ever seen a zombie apocalypse movie? Am I the only one that saw Resident Evil, right? There's like a 4-part series of Resident Evil movies that, okay, some of them weren't very good, but the first two I thought were pretty okay. So, let's concentrate on the first 2 Resident Evil movies. A very similar situation with a man-made virus that ends up leaking the lab, and then everybody starts turning these crazy, deadly zombie things. This doesn't sound at all familiar to these things. Humanity gets really tiring sometimes. Does anybody ever get tired of humanity? Does anybody ever get tired of the hubris? How many times do we have to do this type of stuff? Seriously. How many times do we have to repeat history like a million times before we learn? How many times does humanity have to go extinct and then rebuild because of our own stupidity in terms of science? Why does science always have to do this? This is exactly the reason I'm getting a travel trailer, so that I can try to run away from this stuff if it hits. But you can't run forever. And, as populations get bigger, there's less and less places to hide, right? As technology gets better, they'll find you. I mean, that's where we're at now. I don't have any Alexa products, but I'm sure they're listening to my Mac, all the time. So it's... and it's like we need a solution. I realize that, I'm talking here and I'm reading these articles, and, that you need a solution in terms of, this stuff. And that's a hard thing to find. How do you fight this stuff? Because these guys are doing it no matter what. If you went on the street right now and I had like a microphone and I started interviewing people and I said, hey, do you think this is a good idea? Do you think, or what other applications? I mean, think about this. If it starts here, where else does this go? It's what, because I'm like, look at this. I'm reading down further in this article. I mean, listen to this. The other option is to package some of the DNA from a dangerous new pathogen inside a relatively harmless but highly contagious virus. Relatively harmless, but highly contagious. The great thing that viruses know how to do? They're very good at it. Does anybody know the answer? mutate. Viruses have this incredible ability to mutate. And you know what happened in the last 2 years? We had a virus that mutated multiple times on its own. But why did it mutate? That's a question you have to ask yourself. I tend to find that question is probably in the answer of we kept creating barriers for it, right? By giving ourselves this, different type of immunity. And I think we kept boxing it in and forced it to mutate into something worse. And then eventually it mutated into something not as bad. That begs the question, if we had done absolutely nothing, would this have been the way it went? Probably not. But that's just me. Don't believe me? I'll put a disclaimer on the video. I'll put it right here. I am not a medical expert of any kind. I am a human being with opinions. Don't listen to me. Listen to your medical provider. Okay? Just because I have a doctorate in healthcare does not mean this is my forte. So there you go. That's my medical disclaimer for any opinions I have today, because that's all they are. They're just opinions. These are thoughts. But the problem is, in society today, there's thought crime. Everything's thought crime now. If I make a post about something, deleted, labeled, you're a terrible person. I had a person recently say, and not a patient of mine, nor a friend. So to me, don't care. But, still interesting. They were like, oh, I see that you like Joe Rogan. You're a total blah, blah, blah. And they just had this whole paragraph of what a terrible person I am because I liked Joe Rogan. And I like the fact that he has free speech and that he brings people on to talk without, constant interruption. And even if he has a differing opinion, all he does is add his opinion and they talk like normal people for 3 hours and then they leave and everybody's happy. I'm sorry to that person that I enjoy listening to intellectual conversation for 3 hours as people just talk like this. They talk like normal people. I'm sorry I took inspiration from my podcast from Joe Rogan because I also believe in free speech. Here's my thing. If you don't agree with me politically, but you have a podcast that's popular, cool. I'm happy for you. That's the beauty of freedom. Once again, that's what binds us both together. I don't care where you fall politically. What I do care about is that we have the freedom to say what we need to say. And you can listen to what I have to say and I can listen to what you have to say and we can debate it. But then we should be able to all go home at the end of the day happy, and comfortable and not worried about being jailed or, downgraded in a social credit system because I don't agree with these atrocious, in my opinion, things like this, right? I don't think it's a good idea to make a technology that spreads from person to person. We've already seen what happens when we mess around with viruses. What do you think is going to happen here? Do you think all of a sudden the same geniuses who made the last thing are all of a sudden going to crush this one and it's going to go great? I don't think so. I don't think so at all, actually. And I don't think the human body was designed to handle this kind of crazy stuff. It just wasn't. Our body was not designed to handle that. And I think this would end up in a large tragedy of the largest nature we've ever seen in humankind if this actually goes through. And the sad part is I actually think it will. I think this type of technology in the next 10 years will totally be released. Maybe on accident, maybe on purpose, maybe it'll be announced, maybe it won't. Maybe they'll just do it and they'll say, you know what, sorry guys. They'll come up with a story later saying, we're so sorry, but we knew that you guys couldn't handle, that's what the governments always do. This is what governments always do. We didn't think you guys could handle it. We knew you wouldn't quite agree and that there'd be a large part of the population that wouldn't agree. So we just did it, so sorry. What are you going to do about it? Right? Because what is a government? A government is just guns. That's what it is. It's guns and it's military. I can't believe people don't really understand that. You don't believe me? Go do something against the government, and then how do they enforce anything? It's by the point of a gun. It's by the end of a gun. One of these days we'll talk about, for example, like gun rights and why the government wants to take them away from you and stuff, because they do. Why? Because it's the only, how else then do you counter when they do something? The government uses the end of a gun point, to tell you what to do and enforce the law. But then if they overstep, then if you don't have a gun, then they can just overpower you because they got all the guns. This is one of the things. This is why they don't want you to have those things. They're on television having an excuse, you got Joe Biden up there saying, well, if do you really think that your little guns are going to do anything? We've got drones and this and that. Well, obviously they're doing something because you really want to come after them. You really want them. They're obviously keeping you from doing something. I mean, there's got to be some reason why our government, who says the same things that Canada's does and Australia's does in the last 2 years, why both of those places are fascist, really scary places with people getting jailed and put in, weird, fenced in, basically prisons or quarantine camps. And yet we don't have those here. What's the big difference? Those two places have come after guns. They couldn't succeed here. And look, we still have freedom. It's not great freedom. It's not as much freedom as you had 2 years ago or 3 years ago, but we still have some semblance of freedom. And I think guns did that. You know what I mean? I'm sorry. To me, that's the reality. Unfortunately, not everybody's a good person. A lot of people have not learned the lessons of treat others as you would like to be treated. That's that stuff you were taught as a kid. Not everybody follows that, And unfortunately, most of us are really good people. I truly believe that. I think the average American's a good person. But that's not typically who's in charge, because the type of people who get into charge of things, right? In charge of a corporation, in charge of the government, in charge of this, look it up. They're usually sociopaths and psychopaths. These are the people, they've done studies on this psychologically. The people who get attracted to these, large positions of power are either sociopaths or psychopaths most of the time. Right? Like CEO is at the top, right? CEOs and government officials, they're high up on the list, because they're they're power freaks. They're power freaks and they are egomaniacs. So they go for these high positions, right? Average, good, loving Americans with good values, they aren't attracted to those positions, right? They just want to make enough money. They want to hang out with their family. They want to go on some vacations. They want to go to Disneyland. They want to go fishing, right? They want to hop in an RV and see all 50 states and meet other great people. That's what good moral people want to do. These people do not want to be the CEOs and the president and the government officials most of the time. And if they do, they don't win because they aren't willing to bend the rules like those people are to get into the positions of power. So I think that's a great place to leave the episode, especially if it's by myself. So if you haven't yet, guys, like and subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell notification. If you're listening to the audio version, make sure you hit that bell on Spotify so that you know whenever we upload a new episode. And please send this to your friends. Send it around. And even if they don't like it, that's okay. Come and shit on my channel. I'm okay with that. The more you shit on my channel, the bigger it gets. So that's okay because you have a different opinion. That's fine. But if you agree with it, hit a like, make a comment. It gets it bigger. It makes it spread. All right, guys. Thanks so much.